ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans across the globe, from pole to pole, from sea to sea, welcome to Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a comic book professional of long standing, what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's do a little housekeeping here first. I want to thank all of you who have subscribed. It's made an enormous difference in the level of viewership and the spread of the word about this little enterprise I got going here. And I really, really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, hit the button. It's free. It doesn't cost you a dime. And it sure helps me out, gives me more of a reason to do these things and reach a larger audience. And if you want to go to subscribestar.com, you could sign up. If you sign up at the $5 level, you will get the first print publication of My Sister Suprema. It's My Sister Suprema #1. It's an origin issue by me and Anthony Gonzalez Clark. And it's done in a really cool, oversized European album format, as opposed to standard American comic format. And I really dig it. It's a really nice little package. And if you sign up at the $5 level at Subscribestar, I'll send you one free, and it'll be signed by me. If that's the kind of thing that makes you happy. First question, Ofe, did you make big bucks for Bane used in Batman and Robin for back then in the 90s? Yeah, they used Bane in the Batman and Robin movie, the only Batman and Robin movie that was pretty much a bomb. It's the only Batman movie up to that point that wasn't the #1 film of the year. It's because Joel Schumacher and Akiva Goldsman, they really overreached on the camp, on the whatever the hell it was they were doing. Their therapy was not working out when they made this movie. And but they did include Bane, but Bane was kind of a henchman, kind of an Igor to Poison Ivy's Dr. Frankenstein. And he's just a big brute of a guy. And I remember it was funny, the contract that we had that Warner Brothers has since ignored. The contract we had at the time stated that a lot of the money that Graham and I would make, and we have participation in the character Bane, a lot of the money that we would make off of this movie would be it would be based on how much impact Bane had on the story and how much dialogue he had. And I remember they told us that he had no dialogue. He just grunted. So it was like, okay, whatever. We don't know what to expect dollar-wise from this thing. So I remember going up to the DC offices and one of the managing editors there coming up to me all excited and saying, they've looped in dialogue for Bane. So they looped in post-production and they gave Bane some dialogue, which meant a few more shekels for Graham and I. What that meant, I don't know. But given his, minor role in the film and his, not so great impact on the movie, we were pleased. We were pleased with the money that we got from Bane being in the movie. Even more pleasing was the level of merchandising. They did a lot of merchandising. There was maybe 6 different Bane action figures from which, we saw some cash, which was nice. And an added bonus was that they named Robin's motorcycle the Redbird, which means they had to give money to Tom Grummett and I, because we had named Robin's car the Redbird. And because we had named it, anything that Robin rode around on, if it was a scooter or a skateboard or whatever, if it was called the Redbird, we would see some money. And I've noticed in recent years they've stopped calling Robin's vehicles the Redbird, probably because they didn't want to give us any more cash. And I've told the Tom Grummett story before. I won't tell it again. Now, like I said, we were pleased at the money we made from the Batman and Robin movie, because given that it was a dud movie, didn't make a lot of cash, and Bane was not in it all that much, we thought, well, this is fair payment. Then we come to Dark Knight Rises, which made, $1.5 billion, and has continued on to make more and more and more money, and on Blu-ray, DVD, cable runs on cables, stations run on streaming services, blah, 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 blah. And we were calculating, because Bane was such a huge portion of the movie and had more dialogue than anybody else in the film. I mean, he talks a lot in Dark Knight Rises. He's got all those little monologues. We really thought this was going to be a big payday, and it wasn't. And DC kind of promised us it would be a big payday, and it really wasn't. In comparison to what we made on Batman and Robin, it was pretty much the same. And we brought this up, and they kept delaying us. I probably shouldn't even be talking about this, but I didn't sign an NDA. And they kept delaying us on answers. And then finally told us, look, that's all you're going to get. And we were like, this movie made $1.5 billion. And as Graham said, if Paramount had made it, we'd be millionaires. But Warner's made it. So it's kind of an inside deal. And what they told us was they had redefined, DC and Warner's had redefined net receipts. And somehow our contract was voided. And so it was no longer based on the participation of Bane in the story or the amount of dialogue Bane had. In fact, they denied that was ever true, even though it's stated clearly in our contracts. But you tried to sue a major studio. So what we ended up with was we settled with them, but I'm still not real happy. And the way they break it down now, and I think Disney does the same thing, is they take the number of elements. What elements? And they considered that in Dark Knight Rises, there were 23 Batman elements, including the Batcave, the Batmobile, whatever. Elements unique. And then Bane was just one of them. And then we were paid out of a pool divided 23 ways. So there you go. Hollywood accounting. So yeah, happy with the Schumacher film, not so happy with the Nolan movie. But to be fair, DC is paying more out for story content on things. I've seen money from one of the Birds of Prey movies. I've seen money from some of the TV stuff. If they use your story elements written by you or someone else, they're willing to pay out for that, which, okay, that's something. So much better than Marvel does. DC compared to Marvel, it's night and day. Marvel, you get nothing or virtually nothing. Cameron Morgan, what are some of your favorite Chinese and or Japanese-based comics, books, or films? What are some big influences you had for Way of the Rat? It was, I went over this in a recent video, my favorite martial arts movies, so I'm not going to do that again. But primarily it was Jackie Chan was the big influence because there's a lot of comedic elements in Way of the Rat. It's a more of a lighthearted adventure, martial arts adventure. Not to say that there's not some, wild and crazy action and it doesn't get super violent, but, with a talking monkey as a sidekick and all the rest of it, it falls more into the Jackie Chan camp of light martial arts romp. And that was the biggest influence for myself and Jeff Johnson, my collaborator on Way of the Rat, who I've said over and over again, I could not have done Way of the Rat without Jeff Johnson's involvement because of his keen interest in martial arts itself and Asian history and just the amazing visuals he came up with to make this one hell of a gorgeous comic. If you've never checked out Way of the Rat, you should check it out. And Marvel really should reprint it in its entirety. It's just such a beautiful looking series. Hey, Cameron gets a twin spin. Did you have an opportunity to pitch for a samurai story with CrossGen? How did Ron Mars get onto writing The Path? Well, I mean, when I first arrived at CrossGen, they said they wanted me to create a new title. And they were negotiating with a Chinese telecom company. I don't know how this worked, but we were going to design characters. CrossGen was going to design characters, comic book characters, and animated characters for this Chinese telecom company that had like 120 million subscribers. So this is going to be a big deal. Never went anywhere, but it was. This is going to be a big deal. It's going to be a big revenue stream for CrossGen, and certainly if the deal had gone through, CrossGen would still be around, most probably. But it was not to be. And so the first thing I do when I get there is Mark Alessi says, we need a Asian martial arts story set in China. And you're going to write it. I was like, okay, that's kind of in my wheelhouse. I like that stuff. And so I began creating the story, The Way of the Rat. And like I said, very much influenced by Jackie Chan. I wanted the character to be sort of, blue collar, well, a criminal. He's a thief. I wanted to be real relatable. I didn't want him to be some, a Bruce Lee, martial arts superhero. I wanted to be like a normal guy. I wanted to be set in period. Of course, it had to be set in this imaginary world, not in the actual real world China of the past, but pretty much Jeff and I set it in the China of the past. Post-Mongol Empire China. And so, there we were off to the races. I had, a few arguments with Mark because I made the sigil character. Every CrossGen book had to have a sigil character. I made it Popo, the talking monkey, which Mark did not like at first, and then, of course, fell in love with when the fans went crazy for the character. And eventually we even had Popo answering the letters columns. Mark was he could be a bit of a tyrant, but I got to tell you, he could change his mind. He could be convinced, which was a good thing. And so we would lock horns, but he would often agree with me. Now, the reason why I didn't do The Path is because Ron proposed it first as the book that he and Bart Sears would work on together. And both of them had a keen interest in the Shambara genre of film, samurai action films. And so they did it instead of me. That's as easy as that. I was working the other side of the street of the martial arts genre. And I imagine that the success of Way of the Rat paved the way for The Path. But The Path is a very, very much a different book, has a different look, different feel. It's much more serious series about the samurai period as opposed to our, chopsocky, punch 'em up adventure. M. Sparks. Eric July is very much a modern day Stan Lee with a lot of promotional. Oh man, what is that? Especially the way he promotes his creators, builds up tension and suspense before his announcements. He's a hell of a tease. He really is, man. That guy can keep a secret like nobody's business. We knew Joe Bennett was going to be my artist on AlphaCore, and we kept it secret for a really long time. I mean, so long that the entire 90-page project had been completely penciled for months before Eric finally announced that Joe was the guy. And he is in a way a modern Stan Lee, but he's more than that because Stan was hired by his uncle to work at Marvel, and kind of worked his way up to being editor-in-chief and all the rest of it, and certainly a force to be reckoned with, the ambassador of American comics. But Eric had his own skin in the game. Eric is the publisher. He spent quite a bit of money before anybody in comics really knew who he was. But he had a huge internet following, which he exploited, which he used to help promote himself very successfully. The guy is smart, and he loves comics, and he's a good comic writer. As he said, he's learning as he goes, but his initial efforts on ISOM it is good, entertaining, escapist comic book fiction, which is what he set out to do. He does what I call blue sky comics. They're more optimistic. They're more feel good. They're more fun than the majority of the superhero genre output from any of the other companies. And people are responding to it, obviously. He's doing tremendous numbers. For a crowdfunding guy, Usually you do low numbers, and you keep your price points so you can stay in business and all the rest of it. But Eric is pretty much producing only trade paperbacks. Each one of his things is a full graphic novel, full trade paperback. And he's doing numbers on these that a lot of the monthly comics from DC and Marvel aren't doing. So he's got a great audience, a loyal audience, and they're apparently pleased because they're sticking with him and they're buying more and more and more. And I sure hope I can contribute. I sure hope that AlphaCore is successful for the Rippaverse. And I'm looking forward to doing more work. In fact, Joe and I have created a brand new character of our own who will, be a part of the Rippaverse. And, we're willing to do that because Eric is offering a very fair participation deal for the creation of new characters and new franchises. And so we're going to be a part of the success of this thing. So I'm pretty much, with Eric till the wheels come off. And I don't think they're going to come off because he's a very smart guy. Initially, I contacted Eric because I thought, here's a guy, he's earnest, he really wants to make a success of this. And I basically just said, look, if you need any advice or whatever, because I've seen every mistake that every new comic book company could make. And, if you just need some advice, but he never made any of those mistakes. So he didn't really need my advice at all because he studied the business and his learning curve is sharp. So he is a force to be reckoned with, much like Stan Lee. Hey, twin spin for my Aussie friend. M. Sparks, he seems to have tapped into a rich vein, meaning Eric, of Brazilian artists. Does the fact that they are Portuguese speakers pose difficulty for you, or are these guys and gals bilingual? Ever had a situation where a script was completely misinterpreted by a foreign collaborator? Yeah, Joe Bennett, I've never spoken to Joe Bennett, but in communication with him, we were in communication quite a bit on Facebook and through emails during the process of doing AlphaCore #1. Writing-wise, he's extremely fluent. I would not know that English was his second language, by the way he writes and the way he communicates. So, there's really never been a problem there. And he's obviously very conversant with American comics, loves American comics. And so, I saw the pencils as it went along. I had no corrections. I couldn't see where he got everything right. He got all the nuances correct, and he, did a fantastic, as you can see, did a fantastic job. So absolutely no complaints. So yeah, language barrier has not been a problem. And the thing is, Eric's reached out to Brazilian artists. South America is like teeming with great comic book artists. I have so many friends in Argentina who are just fantastic artists. And as I've said many times before, when I visited Argentina, I was surprised to learn that most of my favorite European artists were actually from Buenos Aires. They weren't European at all. Now, as far as translating problems, speaking of Argentines, when I worked with Jorge Zafino on the series Winter World, we ran into one little problem. I think it's the second or third issue. Scully, my main character, is loose in the wilderness and has to feed himself. And I wrote that he finds a herd of elk in the snow, and he kills one and, he's able to feed himself, kills one with a spear that he's made, and is able to feed himself. Well, I never had a problem with Jorge. Jorge did not speak English. I did not speak Spanish, do not speak Spanish. But Jorge worked with a translator. A translator was very good. But apparently a translator had no idea what an elk was. And so they guessed, and this is what they guessed elk were. Sort of winterized baboons, some sort of early primate. But they looked so cool. I didn't have the heart because, these things appeared in like 6 or 7 panels. I wasn't about to ask him to redraw them. And I thought, okay, this is this weird aspect of this strange post-apocalyptic frozen earth that a new breed of lower primate, or higher primate, I should say, has emerged. And we'll just leave it at that. but no idea what an elk was. Triple spin, mate. Okay, I have a filing cabinet drawer more than half full of Flash comics. Most of them from the 1987 series, kicked off by Mike Baron and Jackson Geiss. Mike was succeeded on the title by Bill Messner-Loebs and Greg LaRocque, an era which I really enjoyed, but which seems largely overshadowed by Mark Waid's run. Did you ever get to meet or work with these guys, and have you ever written any Flash-related stuff? Mike Baron on the Flash was a game changer for the Flash. I really like this, and of course, I love Butch's art because Butch is a good buddy and terrific artist. But what Baron brought to the Flash, no one else had done previously, and so much of what we see of the Flash in the TV show and the movies, things like that, and in both TV shows, is based on what Mike did. He kind of thought about the logistics. Mike is like me; he's a logistics guy. How would the Flash actually work in the real world? And he's the first writer to think about the fact that Flash would have an extraordinarily fast metabolism. This guy would need a massive caloric intake because he's burning calories. He would die. He would begin burning muscle if he didn't constantly eat. And there were lots of other aspects that Mike brought to the book that nobody had really thought of before. And like I said, so much of it used in all the ancillary entertainment that the Flash has appeared in. Kind of a basis for so many of these things. And I don't think anybody in comics really picked up on what Baron was laying down. They kind of went back to the kind of, melodrama of superhero storytelling rather than looking at the scientific and real world ramifications of what it would be like to be the fastest man on Earth, be able to run at supersonic speeds and things like that. So yeah, Mike, as always, Mike, when he gets on any kind of established character, kind of, sets the tone, sets the bar for anybody else to follow. And now, have I ever done any Flash? I did one Flash annual with again, my Argentine buddy, Catena. And it was a Flash annual. They were doing like an international theme. And it was a Flash annual set in Argentina featuring a whole bunch of superheroes, Argentine superheroes, which I was given the assignment. I forget who was originally going to write it, but they dropped out at the last minute. And the editor said, could you please write this? I had 2 weeks to figure this thing out. And I couldn't have done it without Kike because I basically had him create all the Argentine superheroes. I didn't know enough about Argentine culture to create, and especially in that amount of time, to create unique Argentine superheroes. And so Kike, did all these drawings. He named them. He told me what their powers would be, and I just kind of inserted them into the story. So it was fun. I always loved working with Kike. It's a massive talent. The only other Flash thing that I was going to work on was I was going to do a follow-up to the Justice Riders about Kid Flash and Barry Allen and Jay Garrick. And it was going to be like a, fastest gun in the West kind of story. But my editor kept slow walking me on the... He kind of ran the clock out. Instead of just saying, no, I don't want to do it, he kept finding artists who were too busy or too slow to ever work on it. And but that's what a lot of comic editors do. Not the good ones, but the bad ones. They just don't, they glad hand you and they simply don't say no, which would have been fine. Okay, no, I'll move on. But, to keep the pitch process going forever, it's painful. It's like Hollywood. Oh, man. The rare quadruple spin. The Thunder from Down Under. One of my favorite titles of the 80s was Batman and the Outsiders, mostly penciled by Jim Aparo. Don't care what anybody else says. He's my premier Batman artist. Sorry, Graham. Graham will take that. He'll take that. He'll be fine with that. After a long run on Brave and Bold, BATO seems to have revitalized Jim, and that's especially evident in the stunning covers. what did you think of the series? Well, I never missed an issue. Mike Barr writing, doing some of the best writing of his career. And Jim, like you said, revitalized. It sort of juiced him up. And I think Jim did some of the best art of his career on this series. And they picked a great ensemble cast of characters. Any ensemble superhero book needs a mix of characters who complement and also conflict with each other. And this was a good group, creating new characters, combining them with old established characters, and Batman in charge. And I thought it was fun stuff. Never really thought about this before, but kind of influenced my Birds of Prey run, because a lot of these adventures were global. And I guess that was the idea for the Outsiders. Batman could act globally. He never had them act within Gotham City because that's his turf. But, he had this group of outsider superheroes who were unaffiliated. And, excellent series. Like I said, I never, ever missed an issue. I did my own Batman and Outsiders for a while, sort of truncated run of 10 issues before I was fired for reasons unknown. But I had a lot of fun working on it, and obviously heavily influenced by what Mike Barr and Jim had done previously. You got another one. Now, how did I miss giving you a quintuple spin? You've spoken a number of times about banked or mothballed stories held by the big two publishers for a rainy day. Do you think this material still exists after all the corporate reshuffling of late? Seems to me that if a fire sale was to be had, or the big two adopted licensing models, this resource could constitute money in the bank. Yeah, there's a lot of unpublished stuff at Marvel and DC. Now, whether or not they still have the files, whether they're lost on some hard drive somewhere and no one knows where they are, or they've been forever erased, I don't know. But I know for my own, in fact, I've got a lot of inventory work. I mean, I've probably got a good 300, 400 pages of stuff that I did for the companies. Because at DC, you had to write an inventory each year. If you were the regular writer, you wrote 13 issues. And some fill-in artist would draw that 13th issue. Scott McDaniel was always so proud that he drew his own fill-ins. He drew his own inventory stories. But a lot of these were never used because you had artists like Scott McDaniel who, didn't need a fill-in guy. He never missed a deadline. You had other guys who couldn't meet a deadline to save their lives, and so the inventory stories were printed each year. But most of the guys I worked with, Graham and Scott and Rodolfo and Butch and guys like that, they just didn't miss issues. So those inventory issues would go into a drawer for a future date and largely be forgotten. I did a lot of stories, maybe a half dozen Detective Comics fill-ins with Jim Aparo. None of them ever saw the light of day. The Joker, the 5-part Joker story we did for Legends of the Dark Knight was actually shelved for a long time until Andy Helfer resurrected it and reluctantly told me that he thought it was an okay story. and he had it re-inked. It was initially inked by Graham Nolan, who inked it just like Jim. He inked it in Jim's style, but they had it redone. I forget by who. It was a British artist, I believe, and published it was a Dark Knight, Legends of the Dark Knight with Joker and Ra's al Ghul. And but for the most part, there were lots and lots of stuff that didn't get published at both DC and Marvel. One of them, and it hurts, man, because nobody will ever see these. One of them is pictured here. It's a Punisher graphic novel that Gary Kwapis and I did for Marvel. You remember those oversized graphic novels? We did a Punisher in the Savage Land, 64-page graphic novel, fully penciled, inked, and lettered, and it's on the ash heap of history. If you go to chuckdixon.net and look around, you can see the whole thing. I've reproduced it there from the originals. Also, the final 2 issues of Punisher 2099 by me, and again, Kike Alcatena. It was a 2-parter. It was never published. The book was canceled before the proposed final 2 issues were presented. And this one hurts a lot. I did an inventory issue of Birds of Prey, and it was called Birds of Prey 1943, and it was done as a series of daily comic strips and Sunday strips. as if it was the Birds of Prey were an aviation strip like Johnny Hazard or Smiling Jack, an aviation strip done in 1943, and it was going to be printed the sideways with the Sundays in color and the dailies in black and white. Artwork by, again, Argentine artist Lido Fernandez, working in a beautiful sort of Frank Robbins, Milton Caniff style. And again, chuckdixon.net, you can see the story almost in its entirety, shot from the originals. But it was never published, and which is unfortunate. I mean, why this could have been thrown into a trade paperback collection as an extra or whatever. It's really weird. They just sort of forget this stuff exists. Another one was the never completed 2-part Detective Comic story featuring Man-Bat by myself and Brian Stelfreeze. And basically it was never done because it never completed because the editor, it was a new group editor, just kept jerking us around for some reason. He didn't like me, and I guess for some reason didn't like Brian. And he just kept moving the deadline and jerking us around and delaying us and telling us to stop working and then start working. And then finally, it just sort of all got forgotten. And, Brian had to take on other assignments. He couldn't wait until the issues would be scheduled. And so it was never completed. It's one of my favorite Batman stories I've ever written. But alas and alack, these things happen. Eminem, having written so many stories through the years, do you feel you have an overarching theme or a subject you keep returning to across all of your work? No, I don't think about themes. I kind of think that has to be decided on by whoever reads it in the future. I mean, maybe you see something there. I mean, over time in Birds of Prey, I had a recurring theme, and it was unconscious on my part. But I realized they had a recurring theme of unintentional consequences, that Babs and the Black Canary would often find themselves on the wrong side. And I think I was dealing with the irony of the age of information, where Oracle supposedly has all the world's information at her fingertips, but often got things wrong because, as we've learned, the internet is primarily full of lies. And so it wouldn't be until Black Canary got on the ground in the situation to find out what was really going on, as opposed to whatever Oracle had gleaned from her search engines. And, but that's like, that occurred to me after I was done writing the series, kind of looking back on it and realizing that's what I had done, but it was all subconscious on my part. I think if you set out to do a theme, it's kind of pretentious. It's not how I work. On the subject of themes and things like that, and hidden meanings in work, I met someone once, and she had written her doctoral thesis in psychology on the psychological ramifications of the choices that Dr. Seuss made of colors in his books. She wrote this thesis, very detailed, very well researched and thought out, about why Dr. Seuss chose to use certain colors in his stories and what the deep, deep message was behind the significance of these, color choices. And then she happened, after getting her doctorate, she happened to be at a cocktail party where Theodore Geisel, also known as Dr. Seuss, was attending. And she went up and asked him, she told him all about, I based my doctoral thesis on your work and blah, blah, blah. And she explained the whole thesis to him, to which Geisel said, I didn't pick the colors, the publisher did. So there you go. So much for themes, so much for reading. But whatever you read into an author's work, that's your interpretation. It's not always the author's, as we've learned. Eminem Twin Spin. All right. I've heard that some editors of the Big Two have said if a writer likes a certain character, say someone like Moon Knight, that they won't put that writer on the title. Have you ever seen this in your many travels, and what do you think of that philosophy? Personally, I think it's pretty dumb, but I'm wondering if you might know why an editor would think this way. Yeah, this is kind of the power that editors wield. This is what they call in Hollywood coinage. Editors don't have a whole lot of power in comics. They're not all that well paid. They're certainly not all that well regarded, especially in recent years. But the one thing they can do is say no to you. And the one thing they can do is withhold work. And the worst thing they can do to you is use your own enthusiasm against you. Look, most of the people working in comics are comic geeks. They love comics, they love the characters, and they have a bucket list of things that they would love to work on. And if you ever make the mistake of telling an editor that you love a certain character, well, you pretty much know he's never going to give you that character. There are, of course, exceptions. I mean, Denny O'Neil, Archie Goodwin, Scott Peterson, Larry Hama. I mean, if they knew that I liked the character, they would assign me that character because they knew I'd be earnest about it. They knew that I knew about the character. I was conversant with the character. And they also knew I wasn't just going to do a whole bunch of fan service. I was going to write, good, solid, entertaining stories featuring that character. And I was knowledgeable. But some editors, they just don't see it that way. They just see it as a whip they can use against you. Something that it's a carrot and stick thing. And they'd rather, as we've seen in recent years, they would rather give the series to someone who actively hates the character than someone who was a fan. Now, I think this is a problem that editors like Denny O'Neil had because everyone wanted to write Batman. And saying you were a big Batman fan wasn't going to get you anywhere with Denny because who in comics isn't a big Batman fan? So that was kind of meaningless. But if you were a fan of, say, The Punisher or Conan or something like that, a lot of times, in my case, Larry Hama and Don Daly responded by giving me assignments because they knew I dug it. They knew I'd do a good job. I wasn't going to phone it in on a character I love so much. But I don't think, there's nobody editing comics now, anything like Larry Hama or Denny O'Neil or even Don Daly, who, was a different kind of cat. But I liked working with Don. Some people didn't. He was a little eccentric. So if Don's listening, I love you, Don. Always will, man. Awesome guy. So yeah, that is true. What you heard is absolutely true. They are a petty, craven, cowardly bunch, these comic book editors. Story time. You people really like the James Earl Jones story. So I thought I'd tell you another story of my time working at Channel 6, the ABC affiliate, the flamethrower station WPVI in Philadelphia. And as I've said before, I worked as a janitor, which made me a fly on the wall. If you're a janitor, people ignore you. It's like you're not there. You're part of the scenery. You're a piece of furniture. And so they'll, do whatever. They'll act. And so I saw some amazing stuff at Channel 6. Now, one of the funniest things that happened was they had a daily show called Dialing for Dollars, and it ran from 10 until 11 every morning. And it was a real cheeseball local show. It was like a chat show with the aspect that they would call people on the phone who had entered this contest. And if you answered the trivia question correctly, you'd win a cash prize. And it never was really amounted to that much, but it could add up over time if people didn't know the answer. But generally people did because they kept the questions easy. It was a feel-good show. It was hosted by the Jim O'Brien, Channel 6's extremely popular weatherman, and Connie Roosenspan, the former Miss Connie of Philadelphia's version of Romper Room. So cheeseball show, fun show, local, and every day largely elderly people would climb out of jitneys and buses and taxis and show up for the free tickets to Dialing for Dollars to go sit in the bleachers. And I was a janitor, I was a big goofy guy, 6'3" in an orange jumpsuit and a beard. And they would basically, we didn't have a security guard, so I was like ancillary security guard. I would basically stand in the hallway to make sure no one left the Dialing for Dollars area, right? So if you lined up for Dialing for Dollars, you had to stay there. And they basically just had me in the hallway saying, oh, no, you can't come down here. Oh, and we never had any trouble until one day a bus pulled up and a whole bunch of people got off and they all got in line. And then, but they didn't stay in line. They started wandering all over the station. I mean, they broke up into groups or singularly. They started getting on elevators. And I couldn't keep up with it. And I worked with this really nice woman, and she would also help keep people from straying. But we couldn't keep up with these people. They split up like termites, and they just invaded the whole building. They were in the executive offices. They were wandering into studios. They were wandering into master control. They were, in the green room. I mean, they were everywhere, and we couldn't round them up because they went everywhere. One particularly funny one was they came and got me. Like I'm 6'3", big guy. And they said, could you come get this guy out of the dressing room? So I go in the dressing room and there's these women there and they're models. And they say, look, this guy won't leave, and they can't get dressed with him standing here. And he just won't leave, right? And he was this, chubby little guy, looked like an unmade bed. And I said, look, sir, you have to go. And his answer was quite frank, and I can't blame him for his answer. He says, I don't want to. So he wanted to stay in the dressing room and watch these models change clothes. And so I kind of took him by the elbow, and he was very docile. And I took him by the elbow and sort of led him back to the line waiting for Dialing for Dollars. Now, we reached a point where they were trying to recruit people to help herd these people back into the line. And one of them was, and this isn't a picture of her, but one of them was Miss Elaine, who was one of the characters on the Captain Noah morning show. Captain Noah was a children's show, local Philadelphia children's show. And Miss Elaine was one of his crew members, nice young woman in a sailor suit. She gets recruited along with others to help sort of bring these people together. Well, Miss Elaine, man, she took charge. She wanted answers. So she goes up to this group of people and she's like, who are you? Where did you come from? And what we learned was that they came from a local mental home. And the bus full of, mental patients showed up, was unloaded. And, the people supervising, the orderlies and nurses who were with them, didn't stay with them. They went over to the Holiday Inn to have breakfast and left these people to their own devices. Now, these people were like tranquilized to the gills, not real sure where they were or why they were there. And so when we finally got them all together, herded into one spot, I remember Miss Elaine saying, so who's in charge here? And this guy in a tweed suit, he kind of looked like a crazy version of Richard Nixon. Comes up and he goes, oh, I happen to be in charge. Here's my credentials. And he pulls out his wallet and he opens his wallet. And both Miss Elaine and I are looking at his wallet thinking there's going to be some sort of, ID, photo ID or something there, some certification. And his wallet was full of toothpicks. That's all that was in his wallet was toothpicks. And so a group was sent out to hunt for the people who were supposed to be in charge of this crowd. And finally, they found them at the Holiday Inn and told them, look, you get your people back on the bus and get the hell out of here and never come back to Dialing for Dollars ever again. So then now we got them all out of the building. But now there was a mad rush because we had no audience for Dialing for Dollars. And so we had to go around the studio asking anybody who wasn't, real busy for the next hour to come sit in the bleachers and pretend to be the Dialing for Dollars audience. And I had to, take my jumpsuit off. And so we got people out of master control and the art department and everything else to go sit in the bleachers and pretend to be avid fans of the Dialing for Dollars show. So there you go. Another story of my fabulous blue collar work history before I got lucky enough to work in the comics field. If you have questions, suggestions, whatever, you want to hear some more story time, I got stories. brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. It is the best way to get a hold of me. And if you haven't already ordered it, it is still available, but not for much longer. It's available in demand. First Kill, Rambo's first mission in Vietnam. It's pretty much Rambo's origin story. It's on Indiegogo. So look for Indiegogo First Kill. I think it's going to be available in demand until the end of the month, and it'll be released pretty soon. I mean, the artwork is all completed. I think most of the color artwork is completed. We're waiting on a couple of variant covers, and then we are in business. But if you want to get it now, because the time is running out. I think end of August is going to be it for First Kill Rambo at Indiegogo. And that's it for me for this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Especially thanks for subscribing. It's been an enormous help. And I will see you